Amelia loved her little flower shop, nestled on the quiet corner of Pine Street. Every morning, she unlocked the door, inhaling the fresh scent of roses, lilies, and daisies. The shop was her safe space, filled with vibrant colors and soothing fragrances. She often lost herself in arranging blooms, creating beauty in the simplest of ways. Today started like any other. The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting a golden glow over the shelves. Amelia arranged a display of pink tulips when the familiar jingle of the doorbell startled her. She looked up to see a tall man step inside, his confident stride catching her attention immediately. He wore a sharp navy suit, the kind that screamed power and wealth. His shoes were polished, his hair neatly styled, but his expression was tense, almost impatient. For a moment, Amelia froze, unsure whether to greet him or let him approach first. The man's piercing blue eyes scanned the shop before landing on her. "I need a bouquet," he said abruptly, his voice firm and authoritative. Amelia blinked, slightly taken aback by his directness. "Of course," she replied, forcing a smile. "What kind of bouquet are you looking for?" The man sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Something elegant, but not overly flashy. It's for a business meeting," he added, almost as an afterthought. Amelia nodded, stepping toward the cooler to pick out flowers. She worked quickly, selecting white lilies, green hydrangeas, and soft eucalyptus leaves. As she arranged the bouquet, she could feel his gaze following her every movement. It wasn't just a casual glance, it was sharp, analytical, as though he were trying to figure her out. "Busy day?" she asked, hoping to break the silence. He shrugged, his jaw tightening. "You could say that," he replied curtly. Amelia bit her lip, sensing that he wasn't the chatty type. When she handed him the finished bouquet, his fingers brushed hers briefly, sending an unexpected jolt through her. She quickly withdrew her hand, hiding her reaction. "This should be perfect," she said, her voice steady. He inspected the arrangement, nodding in approval. "Thank you," he said, handing over his credit card. His tone was more sincere this time, softer even. Amelia processed the payment, her curiosity about this stranger growing. Before she could say anything else, he turned to leave, the bouquet in hand. As the door closed behind him, the bell jingled once more. Amelia stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where he had been. Something about him lingered in her mind, a strange mix of intrigue and irritation. What a charmer, she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. She turned back to her work, not realizing that this brief encounter would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Later that day, Amelia found herself glancing at the door whenever the bell rang. It was silly, she thought, to wonder if he might come back. After all, he was just another customer. But something about him, his intensity, his presence, had left an impression. As the evening approached, Amelia closed up the shop, the mysterious man still on her mind. She told herself to forget about him, but deep down, she knew that this was only the beginning. The next morning, Amelia opened her shop as usual, the scent of fresh blooms filling the air. She busied herself with arranging new bouquets, her hands moving instinctively as her mind wandered. She couldn't shake the image of the mysterious man from the day before. As the hours passed, customers came and went, but none held her interest for long. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly noon. Just as she was about to head to the back room for a quick break, the doorbell jingled. She looked up, and there he was. This time, he wasn't in a suit. He wore a light gray sweater and dark jeans, his demeanor noticeably more relaxed. Amelia felt her heart skip a beat, but she quickly composed herself. "Back for more flowers?" she asked, trying to sound casual. The man offered a small smile. The tension in his face from yesterday noticeably softened. Actually, yes, he said, stepping closer to the counter. But this time, it's personal, not business. Amelia raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his sudden change in tone. I need something special, he continued, his voice quieter now. Let's for my mother's birthday. She loves flowers, and I thought I'd surprise her. Amelia's heart warmed at his words. The idea of this seemingly stoic man going out of his way for his mother was endearing. What's her favorite flower? Amelia asked, grabbing a notepad to jot down ideas. The man hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly. Roses? He said after a moment. Pink ones, I think. Amelia nodded, already envisioning the bouquet. As she worked, she decided to make conversation. I don't think I caught your name yesterday, she said, glancing up at him. He seemed taken aback for a moment before replying. It's Ethan. And you're Amelia, she said with a smile. Nice to officially meet you, Ethan. He nodded, his lips curving into a slight smile. For a moment, they held each other's gaze before Amelia returned her focus to the bouquet. She carefully arranged the pink roses, adding white baby's breath and delicate greenery for contrast. The bouquet was simple yet elegant, perfect for a birthday gift. When she finished, she handed it to Ethan, who examined it with quiet appreciation. This is perfect, he said, his voice sincere. Thank you, Amelia. She felt a strange warmth at hearing her name from his lips, but she brushed it off. You're welcome, she replied. I hope your mom loves it. As he paid, Ethan hesitated, as if he wanted to say something else. Amelia waited, her curiosity growing. Finally, he cleared his throat. Do you always work here alone? He asked, his tone casual but his eyes intense. Most of the time, Amelia said, shrugging. It's my shop, so I like being here. Why do you ask? Ethan seemed to consider his words carefully before answering. Just seems like a lot to handle on your own, he said, his gaze flickering around the shop. Amelia smiled, touched by his concern. It can be, but I love it. Flowers make people happy, and that makes it all worth it. Ethan nodded, a thoughtful look crossing his face. Well, if you ever need an extra pair of hands, let me know, he said, surprising her. I'm not great with flowers, but I can learn. Amelia laughed, the sound light and genuine. You'll keep that in mind, she said, her smile lingering. Ethan left shortly after, the bouquet in hand. Amelia watched him go, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. There was something about him, something she couldn't quite put into words. Over the next few days, Ethan became a regular visitor at the shop. Sometimes he came to buy flowers, and other times he simply stopped by to chat. Each visit brought them closer, their conversations growing longer and more personal. Amelia learned that Ethan was a successful architect with a passion for designing homes. He told her about his childhood, his travels, and his dreams for the future. In turn, she shared her own story. How she had inherited the flower shop from her grandmother and how it had become her sanctuary. The more they talked, the more Amelia found herself looking forward to his visits. She tried to remind herself that he was just a customer, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's visits to the flower shop became Amelia's favorite moments. Whenever the doorbell jingled, her heart leaped with hope. Most times, it was him, walking in with his charming smile and easy demeanor. One chilly afternoon, Ethan arrived holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. Amelia looked up from a bouquet she was arranging and laughed. Coffee delivery, she asked, her tone playful. He grinned, setting the cups on the counter. You looked like you could use a break, he said. You're always working so hard in here. The warmth of the coffee matched the warmth that filled Amelia's heart. Their conversations flowed effortlessly. Ethan shared stories of his architectural projects, while Amelia talked about her favorite flowers and the customers who loved them. They laughed often, a bond quietly forming between them. One day, Ethan noticed a photo on the wall. It was of Amelia as a child, holding a bouquet of daisies. "Is that you?" he asked, stepping closer to examine it. The memories that shape us, Amelia nodded, a nostalgic smile spreading across her face. "That's me and my grandmother," she said. "She taught me everything I know about flowers. This shop was her dream, and now it's mine." Ethan studied the pride and sadness in her expression. "She must have been an amazing woman," he said softly. "She was," Amelia replied. "I just hope I'm making her proud." Her voice carried a vulnerability that made Ethan's admiration for her grow. "You are," Ethan said with conviction. "This place is beautiful, and so are the things you create. Anyone who walks in can feel the love you've poured into it." His words touched Amelia deeply, leaving her momentarily speechless. Instead of replying, she simply smiled, her cheeks warming under his gaze. For the first time, "Let's get started," she realized how much she looked forward to Ethan's presence in her world. Unspoken secrets as their friendship grew. Amelia started wondering about Ethan's life outside the shop. He rarely mentioned his personal life, and she hesitated to pry. But one day, her curiosity won. "Ethan," she began, her hands busy arranging lilies, "you never talk about your family. Besides your mom, is there anyone close to you?" Ethan's cheerful demeanor faded. He looked down, his expression guarded. "There was someone," he said after a pause. "But it didn't work out." Amelia sensed the weight of his words and chose not to push further. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "I didn't mean to bring up anything painful." "It's okay," Ethan replied, forcing a smile. "Some things aren't meant to be." But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story. A story he wasn't ready to share. A token of friendship, the next morning, Amelia decided to brighten Ethan's day. She created a small arrangement of yellow roses, symbolizing friendship and new beginnings. When Ethan arrived later, she handed it to him with a shy smile. "What's this for?" he asked, surprised by the gesture. "Just a thank you," Amelia said simply. "For all the coffee, the stories, and just for being you." Ethan looked at the bouquet, his expression softening. "You didn't have to do this," he said, though his voice was full of gratitude. "I wanted to," Amelia replied. Their eyes met for a brief moment, unspoken emotions hanging in the air. "Thank you," Ethan said sincerely. "It means a lot." As he left with the flowers, Amelia felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, their paths were meant to intertwine in ways neither of them had imagined. As winter settled in, the flower shop became a haven of warmth and color amidst the cold. Ethan's visit continued, each one bringing a sense of comfort to Amelia's days. The snow piled high outside, but inside their connection grew like a delicate bud finding the light. One snowy evening, Amelia decided to close early. She stepped outside to lock the door, only to find Ethan waiting on the sidewalk. He held a scarf in his hand. "You forgot this at the coffee shop yesterday," he said, smiling sheepishly. Amelia laughed, taking the scarf from him. "Thank you," she said. "You're becoming my personal lost and found service." The playful banter felt natural, as if they'd known each other for years. Ethan hesitated before speaking again. "Are you free tonight? There's a new exhibit at the art gallery downtown. I thought it might be something you'd like." Amelia blinked in surprise, her heart skipping a beat. "That sounds lovely," she said. "Let me grab my coat." An evening of discovery, the art gallery glowed with soft lights and murmurs of conversation. Ethan and Amelia strolled through the exhibits, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Ethan pointed out architectural pieces, while Amelia admired paintings of nature that reminded her of the flowers she loved. They paused in front of a sculpture, its lines flowing like petals in the wind. "It's beautiful," Amelia whispered, her voice full of awe. "It reminds me of you," Ethan said softly. Amelia turned to him, her cheeks warming. She searched his face for signs of teasing, but found only sincerity. "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely audible. She looked away, feeling the rush of emotions she wasn't quite ready to name. A moment of vulnerability as they left the gallery, the cold air wrapped around like a blanket. Ethan offered his arm, and Amelia took it, grateful for the warmth. They walked in silence, the snow crunching beneath their feet. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said after a while, his voice tentative. "Of course," Amelia replied. "Why flowers?" he asked. "Out of all the things you could do, why run a flower shop?" Amelia thought for a moment, her breath visible in the frosty air. "Because flowers make people happy," she said. "They're simple, but they carry so much meaning. I like being part of people's special moments, even if it's just in a small way." Ethan nodded, his admiration for her growing. "That's beautiful," he said. "You're amazing, Amelia." The confession, by the time they reached Amelia's shop, the streets were quiet, the world blanketed in snow. Ethan hesitated, his hands buried in his coat pockets. "I've been meaning to tell you something," he said, his voice low. Amelia turned to him, her heart pounding. "What is it?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. "I didn't just stumble into your shop that day," Ethan admitted. "I saw it on my way to work and kept thinking about it. Something about you drew me in, and now I can't imagine not being here." Amelia's breath caught. She searched his face for signs of jest, but found only earnestness. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say I can keep coming back," Ethan said, a hopeful smile tugging at his lips. Amelia felt a warmth spread through her chest. "You can," she said simply. Unspoken promises as Ethan walked away that night. Amelia stood in the doorway of her shop, watching his figure disappear into the falling snow. Her heart was full, her thoughts swirling with emotions she could no longer deny. Inside, she looked at the bouquet of yellow roses he had left behind weeks ago. She smiled, knowing that their story was only just beginning. The days that followed were filled with a quiet anticipation. Amelia and Ethan fell into an unspoken rhythm. He visited the flower shop almost daily, sometimes with a cup of coffee, other times just to say hello. Each visit brought new stories, shared laughter, and the unspoken understanding that their lives were becoming intertwined. One morning, Ethan arrived with a bouquet of his own. It wasn't grand or elaborate, just a handful of wildflowers tied together with twine. "These reminded me of you," he said, handing them to Amelia. She took them, her heart fluttering. "They're beautiful," she said, her fingers brushing his as she accepted the bouquet. She set them in a vase near the counter, their vibrant colors brightening the shop. A special invitation that evening, as Amelia was closing the shop, Ethan appeared at the door. "Do you have plans tomorrow night?" he asked, his voice tinged with excitement. Amelia shook her head. "Not yet." "Why?" "There's a winter festival in the park," he said. "There will be lights, music, and food stalls. I thought maybe we could go together." Amelia smiled. "I'd love to," she said. The next night, they met at the park, where twinkling lights hung from trees, and the scent of roasted chestnuts filled the air. They wandered from stall to stall, sampling treats and laughing like children. Under a canopy of lights, Ethan stopped and turned to Amelia. "This is perfect," he said, his eyes soft as they met hers. "It is," Amelia agreed, her cheeks flushed from the cold and the warmth of his gaze. The first kiss, as the evening drew to a close, they found themselves standing by a frozen pond. The world around them was quiet, save for the distant hum of music and laughter. Ethan took a step closer to Amelia. "I never expected this," he said. "Meeting you has been the best surprise of my life." Amelia felt her heart swell. "Me too," she said. "You've made my days brighter, Ethan." He smiled, reaching for her hand. For a moment they stood in silence, their breaths visible in the frosty air. Then, slowly, Ethan leaned in, and Amelia closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, sweet, and full of unspoken promises, building a future from that moment on. Their relationship blossomed. They spent their days exploring the city, sharing their dreams, and supporting each other's passions. Ethan often helped out at the flower shop, learning the names of the blooms and laughing at his clumsy attempts at arranging bouquets. Amelia, in turn, accompanied Ethan on architectural tours, marveling at his ability to see beauty in even the smallest details. Together, they inspired each other to dream bigger and cherish life's simple joys. The grand gesture one crisp spring morning, Ethan walked into the flower shop with a peculiar look on his face. "Close the shop for the day," he said, holding out a note. Amelia looked at him quizzically, but followed his lead. He led her to the park, where they'd shared their first kiss. Under the same canopy of lights, he handed her a bouquet of yellow roses. "Amelia," he said, his voice steady, "you've brought so much love and light into my life. I don't ever want to let it go. Will you marry me?" Amelia's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. Happily ever after, their wedding was a celebration of love, held in the flower shop that had brought them together. Surrounded by family, friends, and the blooms that told their story, they promised to cherish each other forever. As they danced under the twinkling lights, Amelia looked up at Ethan and smiled. "I think this is the happiest ending I could ever imagine," she said. Ethan laughed, pulling her close. "It's just the beginning," he replied. And together, they stepped into a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities.